everybody, my name is Caleb Huang and welcome to Course Crash Literature. Today we'll explore style and structure in English literature and how the authors use it in their writing. For every structure that we find within the text, we will slap a post-it on the structure side of the wall. For every style that we find, we will do the same. Let's get into it. Today we'll be reading The C Word in the Hallways by Anna Quindlen. We can already see style coming into play with the wording of the title. The title already builds anticipation and tension, making the audience ask, what exactly is the C word? Watch the rest of the video. Style. Boom. The saddest phrase I've heard in a long time is this one. Psychological autopsy. Context followed by announcing the term with a colon emphasizes the sadness. It's what separates saying psychological autopsy is the saddest term I've heard in a long time versus the saddest term I've heard in a long time is boom, psychological autopsy, structure. That's what the doctors call it when a kid kills himself and they go back over the plowed ground of his short life. Blunt language forces the audience's attention to a gruesome topic, pulling them in and not letting them look away. Boom, style. And discover all the markers that led to the rope, the blade, the gun. The fragmented sentence portrays escalation and the grimness of suicide. If it were to continue, it would go rope, the blade, the gun, nuclear warfare, the Germans, and IKEA. Boom, structure. There's a plague on all of our houses, and since it doesn't announce itself with lumps or spots or protest marches, the beginning of this paragraph uses a metaphor to describe the outbreak of suicide and homicide among teenagers as a deadly and hard-to-detect disease. This hints to the large number and contagious nature of the pandemic. Boom. Style. It has gone unremarked in the quiet suburbs and busy cities where it has been laying waste. The number of suicides, homicides committed by teenagers, most often young men, ouch, has exploded in the last 3 decades until it has become commonplace to have black-bordered photographs in yearbooks and murder suspects with acne problems. The end of the paragraph uses familiar imagery to make a direct reference to the age group that the essay is intended for. This makes the reader feel like the problem is more eminent, closer, and therefore more easier to relate to. Style. And everyone searches for reasons and scapegoats and solutions, most often punitive. Yet one solution continues to elude us, and that is the ending of ignorance about mental health and moving it from the margins of care and into the mainstream where it belongs. As surely as any vaccine, this would save lives. The overall strategy for the first 2 paragraphs is to introduce the problem with forceful language and emphatic phrasing. The sentence structure and diction suggest dramatic and strong feelings towards the subject. It hooks the reader with gruesome yet determined fascination in the topic. So many have already been lost. This simple sentence structure subtly and vaguely introduces the next strategy, building suspense for the audience in anticipation of the completion of this statement. Boom, structure. Frick. This month, Kip Kinkle was sentenced to life in prison in Oregon for the murders of his parents and a shooting rampage at his high school that killed 2 students. A psychiatrist who specializes in the care of adolescents testified that Kinkle, now 17, has been hearing voices since he was 12. Sam Manzi is also 17. He is serving a 70-year sentence for luring an 11-year-old boy named Eddie Werner into his New Jersey home and strangling him with the cord of an alarm clock because his Sega Genesis was out of reach. Manzi had his first psychological evaluation in the 1st grade. Parallel structure draws similarities between the 2 examples given. By mentioning that the mental problems emerged years prior to the incident, the author suggests that this common thread could be the problem, and could possibly be the solution. Bam, structure. Excuses, excuses. That's what so many think of the underlying pathology in such unimaginable crimes. This statement uses common expression to exemplify the carelessness and underestimation of adults towards teen mental instability. It further emphasizes and even guilts the audience into pondering their own thoughts of dismissiveness towards this problem. Bam, style. In the 1956 movie, The Bad Seed, little Patty McCormack played what was then called a homicidal maniac. and the film censors demanded a ludicrous mock curtain call in which the child actress was taken over the knee of her screen father and spanked. Allusion to the famous actress further shows the idea that no one is immune to the plague. Even if the intended audience does not fully understand the reference made, and she was not explicitly a victim of mental illness, bringing her to the reader's attention makes us more aware and wary of this situation. Boom. Style. There are still some representatives of the good spanking school out there, although today, the spanking may wind up being life in prison. And there's still plenty of that useless adult, what in the world does a 16-year-old have to be depressed about mindset to keep depressed 16-year-olds from getting help. Criticism of the lack of focus is shown through an indirect first-person quotation of the adult. This serves the purpose of repeating the sentiment expressed in the beginning of the paragraph, but farther into detail. Bam! Style. This develops a pattern of failure between both the parent and the student. The audience picks up on this pattern and tries to internally determine where the problem lies, whether it's with the parent or with the student. Bam. Structure. But they were threading their way through a mental health system that is marginalized by shame, ignorance, custom, the courts, even by business practice. Kip Kinkle's father made no secret of his disapproval of therapy. During its course, he bought his son the Glock that Kip would later use on his killing spree, which speaks sad volumes about our peculiar standards of masculinity. Sam's father, on the other hand, spent days trying to figure out how much the cost of a home for troubled kids his insurance would cover. In the meantime, a psychiatrist who examined his son for less time than it takes to eat a Happy Meal concluded that he was in no danger to himself or others, and a judge lectured Sam from the bench. You know the difference between what's right and wrong, don't you? Demeaning language like Happy Meals impacts the credibility of the children in this context. They are made to be seen as simple children that aren't mentally capable of feeling stress or trauma. The rhetorical question degrades the teens further by dismissing the notion that the teenagers preserve complete and logical control over their actions. This belittling says to the audience that victims of mental illness are really unable to ask for help themselves because of the way they are raised and the way people treat them. Style. The overall purpose of this section is to show distinction between the problem in the parent's eyes and the problem in the author's eyes. Quindlen uses extreme examples to prove her point, and it does its job, whether it's to convey a sense of empathy within the reader or instill sickening horror. No matter what effect it has, the audience is committed to the topic and its conclusion. It acts as context for the problem introduced in the first section, and builds emphasis for the third section that will hopefully propose a solution that will resolve the issue. The Federal Center for Mental Health Services estimates that at least 6 million children in this country have some serious emotional disturbance, and for some of them, right and wrong takes second seat to the voices in their heads. 50 years ago, their parents might have surrendered them to a life in an institution, or a doctor flying blind with an ice pick might have performed a lobotomy, leaving them to lull away their days. Now, lots of them end up in jail. This flashback structure shows a timeline for the audience that lets them understand where all this is heading. Simply put, by showing us the past and the present, it lines up what we think for the future. Sure, technically jail time is comparatively better than an asylum or cutting chunks out of their brain, but when thought with the future in mind, the audience begins to wonder where it will proceed. Will those in jail be cured once they re-enter society? Probably not. Structure. Warm fuzzies aside, consider this from a utilitarian point of view. Psychological intervention is cheaper than incarceration. Nice irony there, referring to how the previously mentioned attempts at correction makes one feel warm. But more importantly, big word. Utilitarianism is defined as the doctrine that states that actions are justified if they are for the benefit of the majority. This in itself is a counter-argument towards the idea that imprisonment of the mentally ill is beneficial to society. The group of readers that are against it are convinced further, and those who lean towards jail will see it from a different perspective. Style. The most optimistic estimate is that 2/3 of these emotionally disturbed children are not getting any treatment. Imagine how we would respond if 2/3 of America's babies were not being immunized. A fact followed by a hypothetical situation makes the audience think for themselves. By comparing mental treatment to a medical operation that everyone should receive, it exaggerates its importance and vitality in our society. Quindlen implies that without mental treatment, A child would be in bad shape as if they had not received immunization, and thus could have extremely damaging futures. Structure. Frick. Many health insurance plans do not provide coverage for necessary treatment, or financially penalize those who need a psychiatrist instead of an oncologist. Teachers are not trained to recognize mental illness, and some dismiss it, bad seed fashion, as bad behavior. As a newly inducted metaphor, the bad seed is repeated to describe the behavior of teachers towards the mentally ill. By observing the reference to the 1956 movie a second time, the audience is able to draw familiarity with the metaphor. They already know what the term means, and thus understand its context in the reasoning. Style. Parents are afraid and ashamed, creating a home environment and a national atmosphere too that tells teenagers their demons are a disgrace. And then there are the teenagers themselves, slouching toward adulthood in a world that loves conformity. Add to the horror of creeping depression or delusions of a pure derision, the sound of the C word in the hallways. Crazy. Man, he's crazy. Haven't you seen him? Didn't you hear? Callback to the title creates a sense of completion with the reader. Only until the 9th and second to last paragraph do we finally learn what the C word actually is. If you were unimpressed by the big reveal, you probably wouldn't be alone. However, it's exactly this resolution that leads the audience to wonder why the lead-on was actually necessary. Boom. Style. Structure is seen in the dialogue in the perspective of high school peers. I guarantee that I was not the first person to look at this sentence and wonder, what? The colon signifies that the following statement is of great importance, yet commas are scattered throughout like a bag of Cheetos my dog got a hold of. Greater emphasis could probably be created if they were fragmented sentences with their own firm punctuation. I believe this shows instead the unorganized manner of speech of teenagers. Because seriously, who else would speak like that? What was that, structure?
Yeah, it's going right now.
Structure! Boys especially still suspect that talk therapy, or even heartfelt talk, is somehow sissified, weak. Sometimes even their own fathers think so, at least until they have to identify the body. Another sad little phrase is, if only, and there are plenty of them littering the valleys of tragedy. If only there had been long-term intervention and medication, Kip Kinkle might be out of jail, off the taxpayer's tab, and perhaps leading a productive life. If only Sam Manzi had been treated aggressively earlier, new psychotropic drugs might have slowed or stilled his downward slide. And if only those things had happened, Faith Kinkle, William Kinkle, Michael Nicholson, Ben Walker, and Eddie Warner might all still be alive today. Mental health care is health care too, and mental illness is an illness, not a character flaw. Insurance providers should act like it. Hospitals and schools should act like it. Above all, we parents should act like it. Then maybe the kids will believe it. By introducing yet another generalized term, Quindlen makes it easier for the audience to identify the meaning and tone in a sentence. She repeats the if only phrase to accompany each of the examples she gave. It leaves the audience with a feeling of remorse and tragedy as she elaborates on the beauty of what could have been, just like in La La Land. Boom. Style.
Skip it about
After the build-up of the two sections, Quindlen concludes by stating what's needed to be done about the mental health of the youth. She gives general statistics and bold conjectures about what might have been different had the boys used as examples received the correct treatment that they so desperately needed. Quindlen expresses to the audience that the problem is caused more because of perception and ignorance, and not because of the child's condition. In the final paragraph, statements are repeated for emphasis, and the audience is left with the finality in her words. Anna Quindlen's analysis of mental health in America takes note on two main issues. The first is a ploy to dissect the passive nature of parents in the involvement of their own children. They are portrayed through example as people who are trying to do the wrong thing for the right reasons. Notice the examples given were not children who were raised in abusive or harmful environments. Their parents loved their children respectively, but were unable to help because of their lack of help early on. The second point made was directed towards the public, and more specifically, the insurance companies. Financials are mentioned several times in the essay and are one of the main reasons Quindlen gives as to why parents are unable to get help for their children. On first glance, Sam's father is seen as an example of fiscal power being more important than a child's mental well-being. However, a second look shows that he is not in the wrong here. While his actions were extreme and much too late for Sam, the father was looking for the best solution, the solution that might have been available had insurance been more wary of the dangers of mental health and its importance. Her final words also hint that her use of collective pronoun we implies that she too is a parent. This greatly closes the distance between herself and the reader, and she is given the credibility of a parent who loves her children. Still, this all leaves the audience with one final question. Where do we go from here? Quindlen laid out the facts, where the problem lies, and even how a solution could be developed, but there is never a definitive answer. Thus, our purpose of this essay is not to fix the problem, but rather to get the majority thinking about the issue and to spread awareness. Her overall style and structure leans towards language that speaks to people. It doesn't sound as professional or intelligent as a lab report. It doesn't possess harsh bias to fulfill a political agenda. It is purely a work of humanity. That is what The C Word in the Hallways by Anna Quindlen is about. So, what did we learn here? Line! Awareness is everything. Insurance doesn't just cover home and auto, and stay away from IKEA. Thanks for watching.